Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Habitat Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Van Hees, and we are here to become better habitat managers. We do that by interviewing all the experts and gurus and regular guys like you and I out there becoming better habitat managers. I'd like to first off thank the listeners for tuning in once again this week. We have another great episode where we talk to you guys, the listeners. We put a post out on social media on what questions you'd like us to discuss with our upcoming 2019 plans, both habitat and hunting. So I got Brian, the co-host, on the line, and Al from Ohio, also a contributor to the podcast. He is on the line as well. And we dive into these great listener questions. That's a really good discussion on it. I had a really good time chatting with these guys, talking habitat. I love this stuff. I'd also like to thank a couple of the listeners for their iTunes reviews. Doug Dog wrote, "Very informative, helpful for everyone trying to make their land better for wildlife. Great speakers with lots of knowledge, highly recommend." Doug, we really appreciate that review. I will find you on Facebook, sir, for the decal. Here's another one from Buckmark5. Seen a lot of buzz around Facebook about this podcast, so I thought I'd check it out. Man, I'm hooked. Keep them coming. Mike B. Mike, I will be sure to find you, get you that decal. Thank you guys so much for those reviews. That's like my favorite part of this whole thing is just hearing that type of feedback and enjoying that you guys are learning along with us. So thank you so much for those iTunes podcast app reviews. Like I said, I'll get you guys those decals. Moving on, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We have Packer Max Call to Packers, the Habitat Hook, Dip That Hydrographics, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, and Killer Food Plots. Those are the friends and sponsors that help support this show, guys. We'd appreciate it if you checked out their websites. All their info is on our Facebook page and habitatpodcast.com. All right. Without further ado, let's get these listener questions covered. All right, guys, we are back. Another episode of the Habitat Podcast. On the line tonight, my co-host Brian Halbleib and full-time podcast contributor Al James. How are you tonight, Al?
I'm doing good, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's habitat season. I got a bush latte here. I got Brian on the other line. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, my friend?
We had a couple warm days, and trees are starting to be shipped to at least around here. I know Corey's going down to get our tree order here shortly, get those in the ground from Morse. How about you guys? What's new down in Ohio and PA?
No, same with you, man. I actually just got a order. I've ordered a lot of trees over the years from Stark Brothers Nursery out of Missouri. So I ordered some trees from them this year. I actually I just got them yesterday, I think. So I'm gonna get some trees. Normally I'm like way ahead. I think normally I've had trees ordered for a while and had them even some in the ground. But I just got some of mine, and I'm going to be planting them probably on this coming Friday. So kind of in the same boat as you guys.
You've had pretty good luck with those trees from Stark, right?
Yeah, I've had really good luck with them, actually, other than the mistakes that I made one year. I kind of was making it way overcomplicated for growing fruit trees, and decided to spray them with this preventative, I don't know what it was. I think it was a preventative like bug repellent type of spray. And what I didn't realize, I read the whole label, but what I didn't realize is that if it got up past like 75 degrees that day, it would most likely kill the tree. So I killed like a bunch of the trees. Right? That was like I called the company. I'm like, what happened? Because I always rinse my sprayers out. I knew there wasn't any GOI or anything in the sprayer, and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, oh yeah, it's kind of hidden, but yeah, if you spray it and it warms up, then it can actually burn and sometimes kill the tree. I
Wow.
was like, well, I was like 100%, so it definitely killed all of the trees that I sprayed it on. So, but other than that, um, the Stark Bros trees, I've had really good success. They've been really hardy. They have grown really, really well. They come pre-pruned. I think I got a bunch of different options. Yeah, I
Okay.
think you might, but they come pre-pruned. So they kind of take a natural, um, good shape right away. And then, of course, you have to continue to prune them back. But they've been good trees for me.
Awesome, man. And Brian, the Pennsylvania killer, what's going on with you, my man?
Well, I did a couple videos that you guys saw about the pears and the chestnuts. Got a handful of those in and done and caged. And I'm just waiting on some Norway spruce. I got a bunch of those coming. I'm probably going to ship here when I'm in Florida. But I got a dog sitter and a house sitter, so just have them throw them in the basement. They'll be okay.
And where are you getting those Norways from?
The Norways are from Coldstream Farms.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got they've got an eBay page that you can get some good bundles and some good deals from, but it's not, the eBay page is not the Coldstream name. It's something else. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but I've had good luck with those. And I also got some miscanthus coming from Maple Creek. They'll probably ship those out here in the next couple of weeks. So got enough stuff to keep me busy until it's time to start prepping plots.
You know,
Nice.
I noticed that on their, because I'm filling out my Coldstream order right now, and by the time this podcast airs, I'll probably have it delivered, I hope. But I know that I looked at some of the pictures of the Streamco willows on their website, and it's the same picture on the eBay site as well. So I assume it's probably where you're getting your Norways from. I think I'm gonna pick up some of those Streamcos as well, like we talked about in the last podcast intro, and get those in the ground. But no, that's a good farm here in Michigan. So we're getting trees from all over the country, it seems, between the three of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And don't forget about Turkey Creek is another good option, because a lot of times people will sell out
Yep.
and they got to bounce around. But Chris is real good. I think he's got a few things left. If you go to his website, he's always taking care of me and sending me some great trees. So lots of options out there.
Yeah, for sure. It seems, if you're not out planting trees or hinge cutting or getting your spring food plot prep, I mean, the steelhead are running over here, the walleye are running in Michigan. I mean, there's turkey season starts very soon. There's never a shortage of things to do here in the spring. It's like too much at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Too
No
many
doubt.
hobbies, if you ask my wife. Too many hobbies. But,
Hmm.
well, guys, I wanted to get you on the podcast to cover, some listener questions this week. We put a post up there on Facebook and Instagram. We got some good questions from a few of our listeners. I want to talk about those with you guys, and also once we wrap that up, get into maybe some of your goals this year for your farms, for your habitat, and even your hunting, if we get into it. So, where do you guys want to start? There was one question on Facebook. Jared Michael asked, why does Al and why does Brian, or why do Al and Brian have such manly equipment and all Jared uses is a small ATV? That's a good question. Can you guys expound on that?
I think you just answered it. You said you have too many hobbies.
Yeah.
Good point.
Whittle some of those down and divert some funds from other places.
Yeah, this is more of a therapy session than a podcast. I like it. I know, it's I've thought about the tractor for a long time, and it's just like, don't have enough ground to make it worth it. And now it's kind of like, how much can I do with this ATV, I've done everything so far. Might as well keep trying.
Well, and there's so many ATV attachments available today that you can pretty much, unless you're trying to do some kind of giant scale food plotting. You should be able to handle everything that comes down the pike with it. I don't remember how long you were following me on the Deer Hunter forum. I had my old 25 acres in right outside of Cambridge, Ohio. If you remember those threads, if you were paying attention to that, I started out with, walk behind tillers and rakes and backpack sprayers, and it's taken me quite a few years to get where I'm at with equipment wise. And I really didn't have a choice, because now that I've got some bigger fields, I had to upgrade over the years. But it's just been a piece at a time, all used equipment. Craigslist and the local rags at the Tractor Supply or the local diners by your farm that usually have a classified. You could do pretty good with a couple $100, a little bit at a time, picking up a piece here and there.
That's a good point. Al, what are you using these days?
Yeah, well,
we saw your Facebook post the other day. You were throwing some lime out.
Yeah, I'm pretty fortunate. I got 2 different tractors. I got one at the house. It's just what I would actually recommend for somebody who has a smaller chunk of ground, depending on how flat it is and stuff. I mean, it's got 4-wheel drive. It's a Kubota. I think it's 25 horsepower with the front end loader, which is a must, I think, for if you're going to buy a tractor. Spend the money on a front end loader, especially if you do have hills. You'll definitely thank me later for having a front end loader. It just balances that tractor out, and you'll use it more than you realize. And then down in Southern Ohio, I have a 38 horsepower Kubota, and that's what I was spreading the lime with. But both of them, even that littler or smaller tractor will run a Class 1 PTO implement, so I could bounce implements back and forth if I wanted to.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think that's important. When you're looking at those compact tractors, is just you don't want to have to buy like specialty implements for your PTO. Like, especially if you want to buy stuff off of Craigslist, say you want to buy an older PTO spreader, like you want to just be able to know, like, oh yeah, it's going to fit. And most of the older stuff that's used was all built, I believe, for that, like, I think it's called the Class 1 PTO, but basically that means you can run them off of both. I don't know for sure, but I think that there's some compacts out there that you have to buy like specialty equipment. So just like something to look in. I don't know if all the terminology is exactly matching up, but I remember when I was buying the one for the house, I wanted to make sure I could switch them back and forth. So those are the 2 that I have. And then, just 4-wheelers, stuff like that help us get around. And some of those are getting a little bit older and beat up, but they still work just fine.
Yeah, I think that's some good information there. I wouldn't have thought about making sure all the implements are interchangeable, or at least if you buy that subcompact tractor, you're not dealing with some subcompact implement, if that's even a real term, but some specialty implement, like you said, to where you're limited. That's a great point. It kind of, where I started as well, Brian, I started with a rake and a little Scott's fertilizer spreader, the whole thing. So, and even last year, now that I had a quad, I still tried the Phil Holcomb no-till spray and broadcast, and that worked awesome. I didn't even use an ounce of gas. That was pretty interesting. So for listeners out there, there are ways that you can get out there and get some of this habitat work done in terms of food plots without very much equipment at all. If Brian was still using his push behind rototiller, it'd take him about a month to do his farm, but he'd get it done though, I'm sure, if he put the sweat equity in. But
well, that's the thing when you own a piece of property, and I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about that's listening, how resourceful you can get, because we're all doing this as a hobby. I shouldn't say all, but the majority of us are doing this as a hobby, and the funds and the time only go so far. So you're constantly playing MacGyver. You guys know who MacGyver is, or does the old guy got to explain who that is to you?
I know who MacGyver is, but go ahead and explain it.
Okay. All right. I'm just checking, So every once in a while, I'll throw out an old man reference, and I'll get in trouble for it. But yeah, I mean, you can pretty much get everything done that you want. Now, I'm to the point where I'm putting in, 10% of my 40 in food plots, and
Wow.
we're talking 4 acres, and it takes everything I can do to do it on my 1983 John Deere 3-cylinder. And I shouldn't admit this, but I'm still tilling the ground. I'm trying to get a little bit better and teach myself a little more about the no-tilling, and I just haven't been able to get too much set aside to buy a no-till drill. So I'll keep doing what works for now.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point there. I mean, we've been talking about that a lot. I think, ever since we interviewed Eric a while back and we talked to a lot of people about it, but, the no-till or no-till drill or just not rototilling your soil is better for the soil and the biology in the soil and the organisms, but, if you got to get done what you got to get done, and sometimes it's still fun to play farmer and flip the dirt, Um, I
Definitely.
don't expect everybody to go sell their rototiller and buy a no-till drill, right? I mean, but as long as you're conscious of erosion and things like that, Um, I know Mark Drury talked about building like erosion berms on some of his food plots, etc., to try to fight some of that. So there are ways to at least be considerate. Um, that's a pretty good segue into our first question, Brian. Dan Wilkes, a Facebook follower, put a question up about some planters. Um, he said, I have a listener question. Grain drill, Ferminator, Plotmaster, Genesis, or bigger drill cut down? What are the pros and cons of using something like this? And should I go no-till or conventional farming tillage? Brian, what do you think about those?
Well, for sure, like we talked about, you have to have a tractor with enough horsepower or some type of side-by-side or something that can match up to whatever direction you want to go. Some of those grain drills are pretty heavy. I know even a lot of the soil and water, the local conservation offices will have no-till drills available for rent, which is pretty sweet. But the problem I run into, like I said, my tractor's only pushing maybe 24 horse, and I'd have trouble being able to hook up the grain drill that I could rent in my county. So that's one thing. Double check that. Make sure you've got enough lift, and make sure you got enough oomph in your power plant that you're going to be able to pull whatever thing that you're thinking about getting into. I can't really speak for pros and cons for like the Ferminator or the Plotmaster. I've never used those food plotting specific machines, but I know like Steve Bartilla really has good luck with them, and a lot of guys that use them, I've never heard anything bad about them, especially the ATV mounted models. Like in your situation, a lot of guys are using ATVs as their power plant, and they're having really good luck with them. So I'd say don't be afraid of them if you want to go that route. They are a little bit pricey, so that would be a con. If you're pinching pennies like I do, a lot of times for the price of a Ferminator or Plotmaster, you can get a really good used tractor and a couple of implements with it and still have some money in your pocket. And I'm not trying to talk anybody out of those, because like I said, they're great pieces of equipment, but just try to match it up with what your goals are, what your budget is, and what kind of power plant you have to pull things.
I like it. Al, what do you think about that question? Any input?
Yeah, I think that Brian hit on a lot of good points. I think that number one, you have to have established goals. So one of the things that you guys first talked about tilling or not tilling and things like that is, we've said this on the podcast before, and you all have had other interviews, is you have to be realistic with your goals, right? If you're planting, half acre every year, and that's all you're all you're, able to plant and stuff, that's awesome, but you got to use with what you have. So maybe a drill is not is not a feasible option, right? The other thing that you have to be cognizant of when you're looking at these things, especially when referencing cut down drills, is a lot of times there's things that are planters and there's things that are drills. When a planter still needs the ground worked and fitted before, like that's a typical farming practice, right? Is you'll see guys turn soil over and then they'll fit the ground and then they'll come back and they'll run a planter through the ground, and normally the corn pops up and it's knee high by the 4th of July in those fields. It looks great, and they add a lot of fertilizer and things like that to it. But that's typically like a planter. So a drill does not need the ground to be worked. I mean, you can't, just cut through. I don't know exactly what the parameters are. I mean, you can't cut through anything, right? But in a perfect world, a drill will actually cut through the soil, plant it, and then cover up the seed. At least that's the way I've always kind of defined it in my head. So I just like to make sure that that is clear, because I've seen a lot of times where people put things on Facebook or a forum and they'll say, "Hey, is this drill going to work?" And I'm looking at it and I'm going, "Well, that's more of a planter than a drill. That's not really going to drill the seed into the soil more than it's just going to drop it." So then it kind of goes back to, well, like, what's the goal? Is the goal to have like really pretty, food plots? Is the goal to eliminate opportunity for erosion and to grow, get increase your organic matter in the soil? What's your goal? I'm not going to sit here and say one's better than the other. I try to reduce the amount I till. I do not have a no-till drill right now. So to me, the goal has been to, what can I do to limit my tilling, but still increase organic matter in the soil, so I can, go into depth there. But for that question specifically, I think you really have to look at your goals, identify, like Brian said, the spend on those goals, and then, kind of decide, okay, what do I want to do? If you're not overly worried, because you say you're doing a half acre and you're going to till, and it's not a real steep slope, you're like, hey, I'm only doing a half acre, and I want this plot to be as beautiful as it can be, as weed free as it can be. Every year I'm going to come in, I'm going to round up, burn it down, I'm going to till it under, I'm going to let it grow up again, I'm going to burn it off again with herbicide, I'm going to put in organic matter, chicken litter, I don't know, something like that, and then I'm going to plant it, and every year I'm going to have softball sized turnips. Well, it'd be really hard to argue with somebody if that's the way they want to spend the money and that's what they want to do to grow that plot.
Yep.
So I think that it's really situational, but I definitely think that right now everybody is kind of hammering on organic matter, which it's important, but it might not be important to every single person, and it might not be important to the guy who puts in 1 or 2 plots and gets to hunt 3 times a year. So I still think it's important, but in the grand scheme of things, like, where does controlling invasives fall compared to worrying about tilling a half acre? Like, to me, that's total different ends of the spectrum, and I can say controlling invasives is far more important than worrying about tilling a half acre, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of balance those goals.
No, those are great points. I like that as well. You guys both had really good information on that. Dan, I hope we answered your question there. My comment on that, I don't know much about the items you mentioned except for they're pricey, but they're badass. I mean, like Brian said, everybody who uses these that I follow does not complain about them. They're the cat's meow. So if you want to get into the Genesis or the Furminator, I'm sure you'll be happy. And then the flip side of that, like we kind of started off the conversation with, the last 3-4 years I've been using a disc, so it really you don't have to go all out, and you can still achieve some pretty killer looking food plots without it. So it's really kind of like Al said, how you want to do it, what your goals are, etc.
Yeah, Jared, the one thing I add to that, and I didn't hit on specifically, and I don't own any of those pieces of equipment, but I can tell you that comparing a Furminator to a Genesis, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, or what was the other one, Plotmaster?
Yes.
Plotmaster to a Genesis. That's not really comparing apples to apples. So, from my understanding, now the Genesis
Correct.
did come out with a groundbreaker, which might be more of an apples to apples comparison, because I think it has the disc harrow on the front. But if you're really comparing, a Genesis is traditional Genesis are grain drills. So they have a cut wheel. They have your seed box that's calibrated. That's going to drop seed. You have to calibrate it per acre at which you want to drop the seed. So say 50 pounds of beans per acre. And then you have a cultipacker wheel at the back. So that's different. You're literally cutting the soil, dropping a seed in that cut, and packing it with the Genesis grain drill. Versus like a Furminator or a Plotmaster is going to have a disc harrow. It's going to be a similar concept, but you're actually totally breaking the soil up. You're kind of dropping the seed at the same time. It's not falling in directly into any one crack, and then you're packing it with a long packer wheel at the back. So you're breaking up more ground than necessarily would be needed to, I guess would be the argument for somebody who's extremely pro just a grain drill. So they're not an apples to apples comparison. I just want to make sure that was clear, because I don't know if my first explanation talks specifically to those ones, but that's, in my opinion, how those differ a little bit.
Okay, and would you use either one of them for a different seed as well then, right? Like the drill is more of a corn and bean type thing. Does the Furminator or Plotmaster do grains like that?
So I believe that, from what I've heard, a lot of people are talking about, you can do clover to corn in those type of equipment.
Okay.
Now, would you be able to get the type of growth and the yields that you would be out of it compared to, like, say, a traditional drill, where you're putting it in perfect rows? I mean, you could probably argue no, right? Because, with the Genesis, I have even seen where guys will say, I don't know, I'm throwing out numbers, but let's say the spacing on the seed drop is 6 inches. Guys will say, well, I don't want to I want to have, 1 foot rows. So they'll put duct tape over the gaps in the seed box so that the seed has to fall through the other holes, giving you, larger rows. You can't do that, at least with any significant accuracy, with those other pieces of equipment.
Okay. Gotcha. All right, guys. Good info there. Moving on. Let's go to let's go to our Instagram. We had a user, Texas Deer Habitat. I'm implementing a new habitat design that starts with clearing 2 acres of timber with a chainsaw to create a secure destination food plot. I'd be interested in learning more about screening around for deer. Some people say to drag the trees 50 yards into the forest away from the plot. I think he means treetops or felled trees to create a soft edge. But also people line their food plots with switchgrass. Does that hurt the edge feathering concept? I think the question was, if you drag your trees 50 yards into the woods, does that hurt the edge feathering? Or does planting switchgrass around your food plot hurt edge feathering? I think security might need to be covered as well in this topic, but which one of you boys wants to chat on that first?
Go ahead, Al.
That's a tough one without seeing like an aerial. Because I've spent a little bit of time in Texas, lived in Texas, and traveled much of the state when I was there. So it's hard for me, from what I'm picturing of typical Texas habitats, into dragging into the woods. I don't, recall seeing huge timber lots, right? Other than maybe in East Texas, which maybe that's where that gentleman is. So it's hard to understand for me exactly like the edge feathering that he's talking about, or the soft edge. I guess my question is, or my thought on that is, if the goal is to create a 2-acre food plot and you're clearing a lot of trees, you want to make sure it's in a right area of your property.
Yeah, you have to be able to hunt it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now he's mentioned destination food source, I believe, in there. So that's the other question I have is, does he plan to hunt this?
Yeah, you might not then at that point. Yep.
So if he's not planning to hunt it and he's just looking to make a hard edge and have a destination of food source, I don't know. I would be, especially in Texas, you have high coyote populations and high predator populations in general in most of the South, including Texas. So I don't know if I would want to have huge mounds of treetops surrounding the edge of the field. I mean, from most of the things I've heard, Dr. Grant Woods talks about that a lot. He goes, man, you have a huge pile of treetops or something like that. People think it's creating an edge, which it might be, but it also might be creating a place for predators to hide. Which can open up a whole nother discussion, right, on their actual impact on deer populations, which we probably don't have the time to get into tonight. But I think that would be a few of my questions there would be like, well, what's the goal of the plot? Is it to feed deer, and what's the surrounding area look like currently? And then try to go from there. So the other thing is clearing 2 acres with a chainsaw and dragging that much stuff out. My only suggestion is, when I was hearing that, is like, obviously it depends on financial situation and stuff, but one, depending on the type of trees, if there's any at all timber value there, you might want to consider selling some of that timber off and then offsetting the cost by bringing in a dozer or skid steer to pop some of those stumps out and move some things around to get that plot how you want it. That might be worth it, because you try to do 2 acres with a chainsaw, one guy or 2 guys. It can take some time, especially when you talk about clearing the ground. So that's kind of a tough question to answer for me. So I'll let B fill in any spots I missed, which I think there were a few.
No, just to piggyback on what Al said. He covered some good topics there, and made some good points about looking at the big picture when it comes to not only what your goals are, if it's going to be a destination food plot, if you're going to hunt it, if there's a predator issue. But I'll try to boil it down to just a couple of simple answers for the questions here. First off, anything that Jeff Sturgis has done, he's been doing this 20 plus years, and he's done it on hundreds, if not thousands, of properties around the country. So guys like him, Jake Eaglenger, Eric Long, any of those habitat consultants that have been doing this for a long time, and they'll tell you, like when we had Eric on, it's situational, but for the most part, if those guys are doing something, it's working, and you can't go wrong with taking their advice. Dragging the trees in, what I think he's talking about is, if he clears the 2 acres, instead of just pushing it all into one pile, maybe spread it out and drag it into the surrounding timber. I don't think that'll hurt the edge feathering. Just make sure you're not creating a blockade where you don't want a blockade. I mean, obviously, it's good to block off some areas, where the wind might not be right. You don't want the deer going that way, because you're not going to be able to set up and hunt that. But definitely make sure you have a plan to where you're putting those piles, where you're dragging those trees. And, something as simple as walking through with a chainsaw and opening up a deer-sized trail is all you need. Mm-hmm. If you end up making the pile too constrictive, because I've done that. I'll go in there like a madman and hinge cut something, and then I'm like, oh boy, I did a little too much here. But then you just spend an afternoon making a couple deer trails through there, and they'll use it and find it. You just don't want to make it so blocked that you think so blocked that they're not going to feel comfortable. Because I mean, if you don't want them going somewhere, drop as much as you can or stack up as much as you can, because it's not going to matter. They're not going to go there. But if you're going to go back in and cut a chainsaw path through there, make sure it's open enough. You know, you want to control their movement, but you don't want them to feel like they're in a tunnel. But yeah, it's not going to hurt the edge feathering concept. Just getting sunlight to the ground, 20 yards wide around your food plot. Once you get it cleared, the sunlight will do its thing. If you end up with something growing that you don't want, if fire or herbicide doesn't control it, you can till it up and put switchgrass. That's a great option too. You just want something where the deer are going to feel comfortable coming up to that soft edge. They'll be a lot more likely to use that during daylight hours, whereas when you have the hard edge going from timber to open, they'll have a staging area further back, and you might never see those deer in that plot during daylight hours.
Man, Brian, you must be the co-host of this show, because I don't have anything to say. No, you guys both. You guys both did awesome on that. I would totally agree. And like you said, Al, in Texas, I'm not sure how that is, or if this question was in Minnesota or wherever it may be. I think you definitely don't want to box in the deer. But I also walked a property today of a friend of mine, Alan, down in Jackson, down by my farm, and be like you said, when he hinge cuts and drops stuff, I mean, it is impenetrable. Then, so even around the edges of the food plot, it's impenetrable except for enough space for the deer to come in and out. You do not want to block them in or box them in, like you said.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like Brian said, in creating that soft edge.
Yep.
It's so hard to picture without at least an aerial or something like that. But the way Brian was describing, I'm like, oh, that does make sense. So kind of dragging things off to give it that soft edge. I don't think I understood the question as much as once he kind of painted that picture. For me, one of the things that I've set the goal out to do is, we came in with dozers and made some plots, and I've
so
actually
what did you guys do with all the tops and the tree trunks? I mean, you didn't drag them far off into the woods.
No. I mean, we basically, well, depending on what plot. So
push
some
them
of
to
the
one
plots,
end of the field or something?
Yeah, I mean, some of the plots were in areas where there used to be old four-wheeler trails where we didn't really want folks riding four-wheelers anymore, right? So things like that. So we actually pushed everything and made like a mountain to block off that trespassing trail or four-wheeler trail. In other cases, we made where maybe there was a road, we made a kind of a higher wall up where you can't see as much, but some of those have been in place for almost 10 years. And what has naturally happened is, erosion erosion and just decomposition of the material. So those piles that once seemed to be so large are not quite as large as they used to be. I will tell you that they're home for things like groundhogs. I've shot a heck of a lot of groundhogs coming out of piles like that. That's why I tell people, I'm like, oh, if you can avoid that, if I had to do it again, I would avoid it. Again, our terrain is very, very hilly, so that adds some complications to where you can push things in and whatnot. But getting back to that soft edge, I went back and identified, as I've learned more too, right? I mean, I'm pretty analytical, as you guys know, from just the way I think about things.
No, not
question,
you.
question things and then re-question it and say, hey, I think this is what I'm thinking, and then question it again, right? But I finally have felt confident enough to go in and identify, okay, I got 25 maple trees growing up around this plot, and why do I have these here? And I'm going to hinge those back towards, the timber, or maybe
All
hinge
the way
one
around
towards the
type thing.
plot, and exactly, or at least, depending on how the plots lay, at least on one side, where the deer typically come from, to create that soft edge, add more natural browse, add a little bit more of a thicket feeling,
Yep.
versus just having that, hey, I'm in big, red oak timber, and okay, now I'm in a 3-acre food plot. I can say that we've had a lot of opportunities in all of our food plots. I mean, I don't think it's been a major hindrance by not having a soft edge, but also some of them have kind of a natural soft edge transition zone just based on topography, based on some older clear cuts that were done in the last 5 years or so. But I think that's definitely something that can be considered as well, is, if you clear the plot first, you can still take eventually you're going to have an edge, right? Unless you take your whole property and turn it into a field. And even then, you're eventually going to have an edge, right? And on those edges, you can take those remaining trees and fall them into the woods, or fall them towards the plot, or what have you. And then you get the benefits of stump sprouts,
Yep.
as well as the natural browse from the hinge cut, and you create that soft edge. That's something that we're starting to do, and I've been really slow to hinge cut because, you start firing up your saws. I definitely tell people, learn your trees, right? I'm not going to go in there and start hinging every white oak I see. At least that's on my property. That's my thoughts. But just something else to consider, especially that's a big job. A 2-acre clear cut with one guy and a chainsaw, or a couple guys in a chainsaw. That's a big job. So those are some things I would consider into helping create that soft edge.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to take a specific question as we're learning and trying to answer it 100% correct, because everything, if you talk to any habitat consultant, everything is situational.
Yeah.
But I think the main important bullet items from this are: do not box the deer in with too much of a barrier around the food plot. Don't make a full circle and then cut one entrance into the food plot. I would recommend edge feathering. Definitely. We talk about that more on, I think it's the episode number 23 with Chase Burns. He has a really good way of describing edge feathering as well. So if you guys haven't listened to that, check that out. But if you can get that hard edge, like Brian said, from where you're walking through the timber, boom, to a field edge, the deer always stop back in the woods and they just stare out there, right? So if you can make them, soften that edge, feather that edge, per the term, where they feel comfortable going out that extra 30 yards towards the open food plot. Maybe that's now in your shooting lane, if you're hunting it. So I think, that there's some good things there. Miscanthus, another thing you could plant around the edge to give you some cover, some quick 1, 2, 3 year cover for screening. So some different things there.
Border
I think
patrol.
Border patrol from killer food plots, of course.
That's another thing to consider if you're going to open up a 2-acre square or a 2-acre
I would definitely cut that
hourglass
field up. Yep.
Yeah, whatever shape you're going to make it. That's what Nick Percy recommends, and I've seen it with some of the Egyptian wheat and other screenings, and of course I'm using Border Patrol this year to do it. You can basically steer the deer where you want them to go in that plot by just having a strip of taller cover that they feel more comfortable either walking alongside or through. So that's something else to consider also.
Yeah, and that kind of, not to dwell on this too much, but I mean, even Jake Ealinger, he'll tell you if you have a rectangular food plot, he'll plant a strip of trees or something right through the middle of it, divide it in two, make that buck check both plots before he continues on his route that night. And that's what Nick does with the Border Patrol. He got a big rectangle, divide it into 4. I mean, make that buck travel to maybe within your shooting lane to check the other corner of the food plot versus just being out there. Yeah. And so, like, with the question, a 2-acre food plot is a big food plot, in my opinion, and maybe more of a destination food plot, which you might not want to hunt on. So some of these questions might be moot compared, if you're not going to hunt on it.
Sure. Situational.
So you got to think about that too.
Yeah, I think you also have to consider too, like, where, obviously is it at in the country? A lot of times I think a 2-acre food plot in Brian, you're probably the same. In Ohio, we have a very short gun season, and most of our hunting is with a bow. And 2-acre food plot, you're not shooting across that with a bow.
No.
No, not at all.
But in some of the southern states with longer rifle seasons, you could get in very limited access. You could be looking at a 2-acre food plot from 150 yards away.
That's
so
true.
It could be a totally different, it's a destination food plot 9 times out of 10, but when you do go in there to hunt it, a good friend of mine always says, he's like, it's one of those stands when you go in there, something's going to die because, it's low impact. But if you're in there and you have the risk of burning it at all, you better be taking something out of there. And it could be that situation as well. We don't have a lot of that in Ohio, so it's hard for myself, and I'm sure B, you probably feel similar. Like, we have such a short gun season. It's 1 week long, and typically you don't have long shots. So that's something else to consider. As to, where is it in the country and how is that hunting, different. If you're sitting there with 30-06 or something like that, and you can shoot a deer from 200 yards away, 2-acre food plot seems a whole lot smaller.
All right. Well, Texas Deer Habitat, I appreciate your contribution on Instagram. If you have any other questions on that, just hit us up. We'd be happy to maybe dive into it a little bit further with your situation and be able to help there. Guys, great information on that. That was awesome. Like I said, this food plot I walked today, I mean, when this guy cuts, he cuts, and it made me realize that I do not cut near enough when I'm opening up the canopy. I mean, and Jake, if you watch Jake's videos, these guys are just destroying. You know what I mean? And I don't do that yet, but I can see what they're doing, and I see the bucks they kill, and I'm starting to click. So it's it's situational, but it's very interesting.
One more thing I wanted to add on that, and I'm sorry, I was thinking about it earlier, and one other thing that I know I'm getting very intrigued by it, and I want to do more of it. And I think Brian said earlier, Steve Bartelia talks about it, but you take an area where you have a food plot like that, and don't overlook, depending on the terrain and your situation, cutting or edge feathering some of the trails that deer are traveling heavily to get to that food plot. So, for instance, I'll talk about my farm some more. We have big timber that comes into a food plot, and being able to go in there and say, all right, I know that this trail is used by deer every single day. And if I edge feather both sides of that given trail to make it a little bit thicker, let's say 50 yards from that plot.
So, Al, not to interrupt, but what do you mean when you say edge feather the trail? Are you talking about hinge cutting trees to the perpendicular?
Exactly. So, not necessarily going over the trail, but on both sides to give the
softening the edges of the trail.
Exactly. And okay. I forget what Steve calls it, but he talked about he has like these S-winding trails going all through his property from one plot to the next to the bedding, and it's essentially giving the deer quote unquote tunnels or safe
the walkways
routes
that he talks about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right, B.
Exactly, and I think that's something worth considering as well. And another way you can add security and another kind of soft edge to those trails to kind of funnel those deer up through those points where you want them to enter and make them feel a little bit more secure.
And natural browse along both edges all the way into your plot, so they're spending more time.
Absolutely.
Yep, and when you're doing that perpendicular hinge cut away from the trail to your left and to your right, what that's doing versus the parallel hinge cut, if you're to drop trees, like a hallway, it gives the deer that blockade effect where he or she can dash, left or right at any point and escape. Versus if you were to lay them, right along the trail, it'd be more of a tunnel effect and maybe a little bit too constrictive. But definitely great points, Al. Definitely great points. All right, moving on to J.W. Lewis. I think that's Jason, if I'm correct. How many hours spent prepping in the off season? How does that compare to the number of hours actually spent hunting? Just to give us amateurs a reference point, I was speaking with a pro last week who said he spends 200 to 300 hours in prep and expects to have his target buck down in 4 hunts max. Whoa.
Speaking with a pro.
Whoa. That is...
Man, I got to get that guy's plan.
Yeah, 4 hunts max. Yeah.
Wrong podcast.
Yeah, Jason, you might want to call that pro on that question. No, I mean, what I've learned over the last couple years is that the more you prep, get your habitat to where you can as soon as you can before, what I call my stay out time, and before you hunt. So I try to get as much of it as I can done. This habitat stuff, as you guys both know, is a never-ending journey. It's always changing. So really, I've never documented the hours each year, but I know that anybody who has his target buck down in 4 hunts or less, or even more, say it's 1 to 8, those guys, I'm almost positive, scout more than they hunt. So now we're kind of getting to the scouting side of things. If you understand your habitat, which means if you go in there as soon as hunting season's done and you're walking your farm, and you thought, okay, well, I hinge cut this bedding area, or maybe I had timber people come in and take this out. Man, the deer are really focused here. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're using this trail. Maybe they're not. I mean, that's all preparation. That's all scouting. And you can adjust your habitat plan to that. Maybe some of your trees in your bedding area tipped over and blocked the trail. Well, you got to get in there and cut those out. As Jim Browker would say, manicure your bedding area. As far as, the relation to how much preparation versus hunting, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of the people that I follow that are very successful scout and put in the time and work ahead of time way more than they hunt. I mean, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1. You know what I mean? So that's kind of just my high level comments on that. Which one of you wants to go next?
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, a lot of it, what it comes down to is pressure. So if this guy that he talked to, if he's hunting in an unpressured area, that's very feasible. I can remember one year, and you guys might remember this. I had a pretty nice buck with a bunch of trash, threw out some kickers, and he had a couple drop tines and stuff, and I had him on camera. He was coming to my back soybean field every day, and I just stayed out of there the entire month of September, and I waited till the first cold front with the right wind for where he was coming from, and he read the script perfectly. Unfortunately, and Chris Hamberg still gives me a hard time about this to this day, is I'm super conservative with cutting shooting lanes, and I'm getting a little bit better at taking more down, but it cost me a shot at that deer. I mean, he did what mature bucks do. He stayed in the cover, and he made it very difficult for me to get a shot at him, but he read the script and he wasn't pressured. So that's a big thing to consider too. It's possible to do that if you have the right conditions. You're definitely going to be able to spend less time hunting, but you've got to be a really good steward of your land. You've got to be paying attention and scouting, like Jared said. If you know your deer herd and know what they're doing, and you put the work in, you probably will spend less time hunting. And that's the goal of why we're doing all this.
Yep, exactly. And I think that has to relate to the way we're talking about staying out is and maybe the his target buck down in 4 hunts, quote unquote. That has to do with pressure as well, right? I mean, sometimes maybe that was the fourth day in the season and he hunted 4 days in a row, but a lot of it's the right time to jump in there too. Al, what do you think about that?
That's a really interesting question, because I question, like, okay, are we talking, habitat management, or are we talking killing big deer? Because I think sometimes people have a direct correlation with the two, and I don't think it always is. It's not instant satisfaction, or you're not going to get instant gratification because you planted some fruit trees. Now you're going to kill a 150-inch deer in 4 days. Uh, I think that you do habitat management because you believe in bettering wildlife from honeybees to whitetail. You believe, Jared, maybe in your case, I look at it this way. I tell my wife all the time, I go, I'm planting these fruit trees because someday, I hope to have children that I take here and say, hey, your dad planted this tree and now we're picking fruit off of it. And deer, eat from it. And I hinge cut this to provide better browse and better cover to give turkey poults a better opportunity to survive. So I don't think that it's a direct correlation between habitat management and increasing, the pride you take in your farm or your land and killing mature deer. I can tell you, I'm blessed to own a decent sized farm, at least from my perspective, and I could kill larger deer on smaller chunks of ground in the right area in far less time than I spend on habitat management and hunting the deer that I decide to hunt on my own farm. And what I mean by that is, like you guys said, pressure. If I went and knocked on doors in, in certain areas, for instance, there were some guys, I don't remember their names now, but they were known for killing big deer in the suburbs of Columbus. And I'm not saying they never did any habitat management, but they would get a 10-acre piece that they had permission to hunt, and they'd be in the stand, they'd hear ambulances going to the hospital, right? But they were killing 200-inch deer every year. I would say that's much more into the scouting and into the property and into where the big deer are versus necessarily increasing the habitat. So I think that it's a little bit of a tough question to answer as to how many hours you put in. I know when I was in college, I logged 1 year, and I think I stopped counting at over 200 hours I was spent in a tree stand. So I was over 4 hunts, and I don't think I killed a buck that year, but I enjoyed every minute of it. So to me, and I planned probably throughout that time, I continued to plan habitat management. So for me, the habitat management part of it never really stops.
That's the best part.
When I'm in a tree stand, I'm planning. When I'm not in a tree stand, I'm planning. When I'm at the farm, I'm doing one job and I'm planning what the next job's going to be. I think that we can get caught up as a hunting group in success being how many big bucks have you harvested. I think that's a really slippery slope, especially when comparing it to habitat management.
For sure.
Eric Long is one of the most well-respected wildlife biologists in the United States, probably. A good friend of mine, Bill Peniston, out of Athens County, Ohio, who's been around for a long, long time, very good wildlife biologist, and the list goes on and on and on. And my buddy Bill has killed stacks of good bucks, but he doesn't do it every single year. And he almost does, but it's not every single year. And I don't think any less of him or any advice that I would ask of him or Eric or any other wildlife biologist because 1 year they didn't kill a big buck in 4 days. So not trying to knock that question, but I just think from he said, as an amateur, I think as an amateur, one thing I would look at is what are my goals? Is it just to harvest big deer? Because if that's the case, habitat management is a long haul, right? It's a lot of small steps to meet the end goal, and it's kind of ever evolving. It's fluid versus, I just want to shoot big deer. If I just wanted to shoot big deer, I'd spend my money going to Illinois or Iowa every year on a hunt.
Right.
So
Well,
I just think those are things to consider.
No, I think goals has been part of each answer to each of your questions today so far, and I like that. I don't think we talk about that enough. And I think it all depends on.
There's no magic pixie dust.
Right. Right.
Dan Infalt talks about his style of hunting with the hunting beast. People ask him, "Well, what's the secret to doing this? Tell me the thing that you do." And he's like, "It's not a thing. It's a process, and you've got to dedicate yourself to it. It's not going to happen overnight." And the same thing with habitat management.
Right, and if you're a pro, I'm sure your farm is more dialed in, or you've been doing it longer than maybe I have, or some of the listeners. So I think that has to weigh in on it too. Again, a lot of these questions are situational, but I think they're good questions to talk about and cover. And I mean,
absolutely,
if this guy can get his buck down on 4 hunts, I bet his farm is better looking than mine. More
power to him.
And I applaud him for that, because I'm sure there was years of work that went into that to get it the way it is, and I'm sure he knows a lot about what he's doing to be able to make a statement like that. I like you said, Al, it's a long haul, and depending on where you're at in the process is going to determine the answer to that question.
Well, and Jared, one of the things that I have to say, because I hate to hear, I don't know how old the guy is who asked that question, but seeing like, some amateur, right? So it's like, all right, I would hate to see somebody be discouraged because they feel like, oh man, I'm not even close. It took me 5 years to harvest a deer, right? Or big buck or whatever. Like, it's so much of this is based on the property.
Right.
There are properties throughout the Midwest that nobody's ever done the hinge cut. Nobody's ever hung a trail camera probably on them, and they have great deer. I mean, let's be realistic on this. But one of the things, like in when I look at my farm, is we started and we hung cameras, and if I had one deer that was a 4.5-year-old deer, that was the deer we hunted all year. 2-3 guys, not all at the same time, but 2 or 3 guys, and that was the deer we hoped to kill. And last year I probably had 7 deer on our farm that I said, all right, I'd kill any of those and be happy. So when somebody talks to you and says, I kill a target buck in 4 days, they may be watching 15 deer throughout that summertime period that they consider to be good mature deer. Where the average hunter, who's running trail cameras on the back 40 that they have permission to hunt, maybe has 1 deer, or maybe hasn't even had a deer show up on trail camera that they even want to hunt yet. So it's all situational, but don't lose, the drive to hunt, or the drive to do habitat, or the drive to better soil because you didn't kill a mature deer in 4 days. I mean, that's I guess the big push that I'm having on this is just, don't get discouraged, because I've spent 10 years doing this and I don't kill a deer in 4 days. And there's been guys who just spent a lot longer than me, and some have been successful and some haven't. But just some things to consider.
Well, Al, it sounds like you're not working hard enough.
Yeah, I guess not.
No, I'm totally kidding. The flip side to your comment, which your comment is amazing, because I mean that's where I'm at. I want my farm to be better, and it just takes time, and instant gratification is not. There's no pixie dust. It's not just plant this apple tree and you're gonna kill a booner. It's not how it works. But I would say for the guys who are out there every weekend, and putting in these plots and everything else, and doing the work, that you reap what you sow. So I think there's that side of it too. All right, guys. Well, moving on from listener questions, I want to thank all the listeners for sending those in. I wanted to wrap this up. We're kind of coming up on time here, but I wanted to wrap this up with maybe some goals of 2019. Um, Al, why don't you go ahead and take this? What are maybe some habitat and or hunting goals that you set for yourself on your farm here in 2019? What's on the table down there in Southern Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, so the goals for us continue to kind of be um, the same as every year. I mean, better hunt. We want to continue to have better and better hunting. From year in and year out. I guess for me, one of the biggest things is tweaking stand locations. That continues to be something where I feel we could do better and better. One of the things when I first started hanging tree stands, it felt like I hung a stand on the side of a maple tree and stuck out like a sore thumb, and kind of been like, oh, okay, well, let's look for a triple trunk maple or a big oak or what have you. So it always is a goal for me to continue to tweak stand locations. There's been a few stands, honestly, that have been up for a while that I just think, you know what, killed a few deer out of those. I think the deer are educated on those stand locations, so moving some of those. So that's a goal, is to try to get some of those fine tweaked and also continue to scout. I mean, we've purchased some additional land. We were very fortunate to do a couple of years ago, and we don't know it that well. So continue to scout that, and continue to get some trees planted. I mean, I'm going to be planting some fruit trees this year, actually on Friday. Continue to run camera surveys, and just enjoy the time. I mean, I don't really have any, I want to kill a 160 or anything. I'd love to, but I don't have any real set in stone goals, but just continue to make tweaks and continue to work to improve the soil health. That's been a big push for me. I went to mostly clover and chicory plots the last few years and have really limited my tilling because of that. So I tilled when I planted, but have not tilled since. And I do plan to put in some fall plots, but a lot of that's done with overseeding, as well as some limited tilling. I might till like a strip, but continuing to try to increase the organic matter in my soil. In our part of Southern Ohio, it's pretty heavy clay-based soil, so not the best. So that's kind of my goals for 2019, 2020. I mean, trying to keep it pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Trying to not put a lot of pressure on myself or the family. Sometimes I kind of joke. I'm like, I take this way too serious. I gotta have fun. You
Oh,
can't
we're
be
all there.
upset because a 3-year-old blew you out of the tree, right? I mean, it's like I used to, even a few years ago, I'd be like, oh, that stands burned, son of a, and you get so, it's like, it's a deer, like, let's just have fun. Like, let's talk.
Yep.
That was an amazing hunt. You saw a great deer, and
Amen.
let's figure out how to harvest them the next time. So definitely some of the goals for me. And also, I'm going to shoot more does because I like shooting deer with a bow, and I'm going to definitely shoot more does this coming year. So that's it. Those are my goals.
Okay, and what is your, I like to ask favorite tree question. So what is your favorite tree you're planting this year?
Favorite tree to plant?
This year.
Oof.
What'd you buy that's going in this year that you're like, I'm gonna kill a
I'm
booner
obs-
because I
I'm
planted this tree?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with apple trees. To be honest, I mean, I'm just totally obsessed with them. So any apple tree, I like the disease-resistant varieties. Your Jonah Free, your Enterprise. So apple trees tend to be my favorites. Pears are a close second, just because pears are, from my experience, at least pretty easy. They're kind of set them and forget them, type of tree. Might want to throw some seven dust on them for Japanese beetles. But this year, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm gonna go with an apple. One of the apple varieties. I think I do have an Enterprise and a Jonah Free that I'll be planting this weekend. So one of those disease-resistant apple varieties is probably my favorite to plant.
Okay, thanks for that. Moving on, B, what do you got going on this year that's gonna blow some minds?
Well, I expect to have my target buck down in 4 hunts max.
Oh, baby. And what's your target buck
No,
this year? Is he a four-corn or what you got planned?
yeah, Ashtabula County 11 point.
There you
Spiker.
go. Little spiker.
No, it's just more of the same. I'm still working on, when I bought my farm, the commercially farmed fields were just a hard edge up against some old clear cuts that were regenerated with mostly maples, which don't offer the deer much once they get up above 10 feet. So I'm still working on a lot of TSI and trying to do some different blocks of early successional growth. Every year I try to take out, a half acre or so we have staggered ages of forest, so it's not all open for the deer. They talk about you want to try to have everything from 5 foot down is where the deer like to spend their time. So
Right.
I'm trying to create as much of that as I can. We're going to go with some more warm season grasses. I planted a lot of Egyptian wheat last year, but it was a lot of work, and it's an annual.
Yep.
So I'm adding more perennials to try to cut down on the time that I've got to spend, because like Al said, we put a lot of pressure on the families and spending a lot of time up there trying to get everything done, and some of the perennials will help us, take some of that edge off where you think you got to be up there planting all these annuals, and which are good to have incorporated. The variety is always the way to go, but try to add some more perennials. I've got some buckthorn that I've got to keep an eye on, so I'm always monitoring the invasives, and it's a double-edged sword because buckthorn is fantastic deer cover, but you don't want it to get to the point where it gets out of control and starts taking over where some of the native stuff is growing. I think it was you, Jared, shared the article about the red. What was that plant you shared about?
That red osier dogwood.
Osier dogwood, yeah. I've got a lot of native clumps of that, and the buckthorn competes with that. So I gotta keep an eye on that stuff.
Yes.
And working on a fence project. I've been fencing off my borders with the flat ground. It's tough because the deer can pretty much go anywhere. So with a combination of, hinge cutting and some fence gaps and some things, some tips we talked about with Mark Drury, I'm trying to create more funnel areas since I don't have any natural funnels. So
Brian,
that's basically what I'm after this year.
That property I walked today, the guy had a 7-foot fence that was part of his access. So he'd come off the road, was one of his property borders, and he'd walk, 150 yards to his blind. I mean, it's more like probably 100 yards. And one of the things that kept happening were the does and the bucks would circle back behind him and hit his access trail. So he fenced it, and it works. It's very interesting. Absolutely. And so good for you for trying that with either hinge cutting, fencing, or both. I think it's a good plan.
Right.
That's awesome.
So what do you got going on?
Well, I would like to. I've complained about it a few times how I kind of mowed down my open areas when I bought the property, and they're kind of wide open. I'm trying to get that built back up, and that's gonna be a combination of things. I'm dropping some hinge cut trees into the food plot. I'm edge feathering. I'm gonna drag some tops around, and I'm gonna make instead of a big rectangular plot, if you will, I'm gonna try to have a large V shape almost, or like an hourglass, and right where it pinches down is going to be where my tree stand is. So I'm going to try to work on getting that project done just to see how it works. If it doesn't work at all, then I got to figure something else out. Or if I block it too much, then at least I'll know. But if I can guide these deer to come far enough south around a couple of these trees that I dropped, it's gonna be a game changer for sure. I want to hang a 2-person ladder to get my kids out there this year. They're gonna come out there with me
Nice.
this year, so that's a big goal of mine. I'd also like I have to build a real set of stairs to get up to my bow hunting blind on the platform, that hard sided blind. There's some hillbilly out there put an aluminum ladder with some ratchet straps on the platform, and he used that all of 2018. But I frown upon making my daughters climb up and down that thing in the dark. That's not gonna happen. So I got to build some real stairs.
Nice.
I like to cut more trees, cut more canopy. I walked this guy's property today. I mentioned it probably too many times now, but the amount of trees that this guy and Jake Ealinger drop and open up, and I mean, I'm not doing half of what they're doing. If it's not near enough. So I'd like to, without going too insane, try a little bit more this year, see what happens, see how the deer react, and then maybe, go further into it in the future if all is good. But I'm also trying to get a logger in there. I was talking with Ty Miller, and he was thinking about some of the pictures I sent him that I don't have enough canopy opened up either. So I'm trying to get some people to log the back half of my property, but nobody wants to do it because it's so small. So if there's any loggers listening out there in Michigan, you want to come take 25 to 50 oaks out for me, they may be yours for the right price. So trying to do that. And then lastly, just kind of got this bug about hunting some public land. Brian, you did it last year on some public, and I always hunt it for gun season. But
yeah,
I mean, like the Dan Infalt style, you're kind of limiting yourself on where you can go when you hunt private. There's four corners, and I know here in Michigan the big deer live out in the swamps. So I'd like to try to get out there and at least, I'm not gonna say I want to get out there and kill a 3-year-old this year, but I'd like to at least get out there and lay my eyes on a buck, or at least keep looking until I find some good bedding. I don't know.
Very nice.
I just named like 45 things. I don't have enough time in the day to, wipe how that goes. But anywho, yeah, those are my plans, guys. Lots of work. Plus there's trees coming in. Yeah, lots to do. But I really enjoyed this episode. Haven't got to catch up with you guys both on the phone in a while, so thank you both for getting on. I thought it was awesome. I hope the listeners grab a thing or two from this when they're looking at their property plans this year. So
we got to have Al on more. He's got some excellent ideas, and I thoroughly enjoy the group text that we have going just about every day. And he's always thinking about things from perspectives that I don't ever think about, and it gives me something to consider. And I think it makes me a better habitat manager. So I'm very, very thankful that we have him every day with our text messages, and glad that he was able to come on tonight.
Thanks,
I echo that. Definitely.
Yeah, thanks, guys. No, I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy bouncing ideas off. I enjoy talking with you guys. I think I would articulate better in person sometimes than over the telephone. But hopefully it comes across semi-clear to you and the audience. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun talking about something that we're all very, very passionate about. And I look forward to the next time we get to chat. And we're going to get together and we're going to do a property tour at some point, whether it's my farm or your farm or both of them.
Yeah, it's coming up soon.
We're going to hook up in Ohio.
Yep. And you're going to teach me how to score deer properly.
I am. I'll bring the tape measure.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I was thinking more of a 2020 spring turkey hunt on the Al farm, but whatever, no big deal. Either way,
we'll make it happen.
No, I'm just kidding.
Come on down.
It would be nice to
I got a lot of birds.
Catch up with you guys soon, that's for sure. So, guys, thank you again so much for coming on. I'm gonna wrap this up.
All right, buddy. Bye.
Thank you once again, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of the Habitat Podcast. Thanks to our buddy Al, part of the podcast, for jumping on here tonight. Brian, what'd you think about that, buddy? I had a really good time chatting with you guys.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I always enjoy talking to Al, especially in person, like you mentioned, because he brings such a unique perspective, and he just the way he phrases questions and the way he flows his answers. I think our listeners are really going to appreciate everything he brought to the table tonight, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yep, and it was very interesting how we kind of got to dive into the listener questions, which I appreciated. We should do that more because normally we're talking about maybe one person's situation in one part of the country for the entire episode, where here we kind of broke it down. It could have been 4 or 5 different situations regarding one question. And that was kind of interesting to me. I had fun doing that.
Definitely.
You know, I'm hunting Michigan, you're hunting PA and Ohio, and Al's down in Southern Ohio. I mean, we're in different parts of the country, and our listeners are too. So that was pretty fun to do that. Well, I wanted to thank Al and Brian both. Thank you boys for coming on. I want to thank the listeners for coming back once more. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, go to our iTunes account or the podcast app. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to the podcast. That really helps us, climb the charts, if you will, and appear to more habitat enthusiasts like yourselves when people are looking for podcasts. So, or even if it's Stitcher, or Podbean, or Spotify, leave us a good review on there. And let me know if you do. I'll send you a free decal. Just shoot me a message on Facebook. Be happy to do that. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, Killer Food Plots, The Habitat Hook, Packer Max Cultipackers, and Dip That Hydrographics. If you haven't heard, our buddy Gabe is getting some updates. He's getting some movement in his legs, and I just want to say if everybody can keep praying for Gabe and go on our Facebook and make sure to find the GoFundMe on there and help support him and his family through these times, that'd be awesome. He's a good sponsor and friend, so get on there and check that out. And then last but not least, you can find all of our episodes if you're new at habitatpodcast.com, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you find a podcast, even Facebook and Instagram. Find us on there, YouTube as well. So thank you guys once again for coming on as we become better habitat managers. We'll be back again soon with another great episode.